Egypt is one of the most mysterious countries that has obsessed the minds of mankind for centuries. This country holds more secrets than any other in the world, and today it's time to take a peek into the past to uncover some of them. Welcome, explorers, to FactFrenzy. Today, we're embarking on an exhilarating journey through the sands of time to unravel the enigmatic tapestry of Egypt. Remember, it's entirely up to you to decide the next country you learn 50 amazing facts about. Drop me a quick comment below with your favorite one, and the country that repeats the most goes on an episode. If you like the content I do, subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, plus that way you'll get a minimum of 2 videos each week. Naturally, we are all much more interested in the facts about ancient Egypt, and in a moment I will reveal some really wow stuff. But first, let's talk about the modern state. Population 111 million people, with the official name, the Arab Republic of Egypt. The capital is Cairo, with a population of 22 million people, a really huge city. However, did you know that Egypt is currently building a brand new capital, which will be located 45 kilometers from Cairo, and all the country's government will be concentrated there, as well as embassies. Interestingly, property prices there are kept artificially scary high, so that only a select few can live there. Egypt is about 1 million square kilometers, but the most interesting thing is that the entire population of 100 million is concentrated in only 6% of the territory, and that is around the Nile shore. The rest, as you can imagine, is desert. Actually, Egypt happens to be one of the driest countries in the whole world, and the rains there are so rare that people rely entirely on the River Nile. Social media accounts with more than 5,000 followers are strictly monitored by the government, and this is not a secret thing but done by a special law. Separately reaching that threshold of followers, all accounts have to seek special permission from the government to remain active. Egypt is steadily losing arable land to the Sahara Desert. With this rate of expansion of the sands, it is expected that by 2030 there could be a pretty serious problem. The period we know as ancient Egypt was actually quite large at about 3,500 years. Here is an interesting comparison for you to imagine. Cleopatra lived closer to creating the iPhone than to building the Great Pyramids. There are about 2,000 known Egyptian gods that people of the past have worshipped. The most famous ones you've surely heard of. For example, Anubis, the funerary god; Ra, the strongest of all and the sun god. We have Osiris, who is the god of the dead, and Isis, the goddess of family. For over 1,000 years, modern people have thought the city of Heracleion, which is one of the richest ancient Egyptian cities, was just a myth because they could not find it anywhere, even though it is mentioned many times by ancient Greek historians. However, everything changed in the year 2000, when the city was discovered 3 kilometers off the coast and 15 meters deep. This fact makes me think again about what else we haven't discovered. For example, Atlantis, that is mentioned by ancient Greek historians in the same way. Did you know that the oldest clothing in the world was found in Egypt and has been dated to over 5,000 years old? This is the so-famous Tarkan dress, made of textiles and rather linen with a cut that was about 3,000 years ahead of its time. But this is truly a real mystery and rather ancient haute couture. Between Egypt and Sudan, there is a piece of land that is about 2,000 square kilometers, in size, which neither country wants. It is literally the last piece of land on our planet that belongs to no country. There is neither population nor any natural resources there. According to recent studies, there are many more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt. Some of them are quite impressive, as you can see in the pictures, but not so famous. Ancient Egyptians used to shave their eyebrows as a sign of respect when their cat died. As we know, back then, cats were super sacred. And if, God forbid, you kill one even without wanting to, then you too are doomed. Actually, contrary to expectations, the most common pets were not cats, but dogs. Cats were considered too special, and not everyone could afford one. Beer is believed to have been an invention of the ancient Egyptians, as early as the 10th millennium before Christ. Back then, it was called hacket and was considered the national currency. That is, you go to the store to buy something with beer instead of money. Did you know that some inventions we use every day, such as the comb, the keys, the scissors, the wigs, and makeup, dear ladies, come from ancient Egypt? Glass and porcelain were also first processed there. Speaking of Egypt, we simply cannot do without the Great Pyramids of Giza. I have told you so much about them, so I will share a not-so-well-known fact. Did you know that in the 12th century, a pretty serious attempt was made to destroy them and even them to the ground? The Arab ruler Al-Aziz who conquered the then territories, set about this task and started with the Pyramid of Mikarin, the smallest of all. However, he quickly gave up because he realized that it was simply impossible. However, he still managed to do some damage, as you can see. The ancient Egyptians also invented perfume, but they didn't apply it to their necks or wrists like we do, but rather to the roots of their hair. So it lasted considerably longer and retained its original scent. One thing that truly terrified the Egyptians was the hippopotamus. These huge and super aggressive animals capsized boats with ease while sailing on the Nile. And the Egyptians very often organized sanitary hunts in order to exterminate them. Even some believe that Tutankhamun was fatally bitten by a hippopotamus. Do you know how in ancient Egypt they used to cure toothaches? Some herbs, maybe pills, or perhaps through some weird rituals. Not at all. They just took mice and fried them, then dried them and ground them into powder. And from this powder, they made a paste with which they smeared the sick tooth. Ancient Egyptian doctors were the first in human history to divide into specialties. There were doctors treating only eyes, stomachs, dentists, and others. As soon as a baby was born in ancient Egypt, parents started saving money for its burial. They collected for the grave, mummification, and if possible, a copy of the Book of the Dead. Pharaohs allowed absolutely no one to see their hair. Most of the time, they wore a cloth on their head with blue, white, or gold stripes, which was called a nemesis. To avoid the annoying flies, some pharaohs, such as Pepi II, kept naked slaves next to themselves, who were smeared from head to toe with honey in the morning. This way, the annoying insects would stick to them and not the pharaoh. Well, living flycatchers. Baboon monkeys were specially trained and sent to pick fruit instead of humans, to catch thieves from the stalls and help in the production of beer. Here we go again. Imperceptibly, we have reached the middle of this video. If you liked everything here and found it interesting, leave a thumbs up in support. Let's move on though, because some really cool stuff follows. You probably already know that the mummy's brain is removed through the nostrils, and the rest of the insides are stored in jars. The only organ left in the body was the heart, because they believed that was where the soul was contained. Everyone thinks the Egyptians invented mummification, but it was actually done 2,000 years earlier in South America. In ancient Egypt, both women and men wore copious amounts of makeup, but they did it not to be interesting or for looks. Scientists believe they applied it for sun protection and to nourish their skin. They also regularly dyed their hair pitch black, and now watch out, used rotten donkey liver for dye. Everyone associates Cleopatra with some downright unearthly beauty that you inevitably fall in love with. But the truth is a little different. Here's what she looked like according to the latest data. She's not a top beauty, huh? What do you think? Actually, although she is considered Egyptian, she has Greek Macedonian roots. No kidding, maybe everything is indeed Macedonian. It's even believed that her mother and father were actually a brother and a sister, which was a regular practice in the past to preserve their bloodline. There were some pretty serious traces of cocaine, hashish, and nicotine found in Henut Tawi's mummy, and these are substances that are unique to America at this time. This fact supports the theory that the ancient Egyptians actually reached the Americas long before Columbus. Tutankhamun wore sandals on the soles of which were depicted his enemies, so he stomped on them every day. Looking at most of the mummies, it seems to me that the pharaohs were some super skinny, slender, and mega healthy people, right? But according to cutting-edge research, it turns out that most pharaohs were pretty much that fat and very often suffered from diabetes. This, of course, was mostly due to their diet, which was basically meat, lots of wine, a lot of bread, and an outrageous amount of honey. When they buried a pharaoh, the Egyptians buried all his servants too, sometimes alive so they could serve him in the afterlife. Except when a cat died, the Egyptians loved to shave their heads, eyebrows, and even eyelashes, and the reason for this will amaze you. This was done most often to avoid catching lice. Wigs in Egypt declared status in society. For example, the poorest wore woolen ones, or even ones made of papyrus, while the richer could afford ones made of real human hair. The wealthier Egyptians could afford to sleep on pillows made of stone. You heard right, stone, but they were not used for comfort, as you probably figured, but mostly to avoid insects like scorpions, for example, getting into the ears, nostrils, or mouth if they snored. Unlike most other ancient civilizations, women in Egypt were highly respected. They owned properties, ran businesses without being bothered, and even became doctors or priestesses. Separately, they could quite easily divorce their husbands and remarry without much explanation. Wrapping a mummy was a whole ritual that lasted between 15–17 days. But the interesting thing is that it took 1.6 kilometers of bandages to go over the whole body. In fact, the ancient Egyptians didn't just mummify humans, they also mummified cats. There is even evidence of a mummified crocodile. The ancient Egyptians suspected antibiotics, even though they weren't exactly clear on how they worked. They regularly observed how moldy bread on a wound stopped infection and helped heal quickly. The ancient Egyptians also made the first prosthesis, a woman's wooden finger. It was found in a tomb and dated 1,000 years before Christ. It is believed that the overall architecture of the pyramids was invented by a man called Imhotep, who was a high priest from the time of Djoser and built the first pyramid. Imhotep was actually one of the few people who were considered a god, even though he had no noble background. The calendar we use today actually has roots in ancient Egypt. Theirs was 1-to-1 with ours, but of course with different names for the months and days of the week. The main reason for its appearance, however, was not to keep track of weekdays and weekends, but the annual flooding of the Nile, which if not predicted, could do serious damage. We all know about hieroglyphics, the writing of the ancient Egyptians, but according to the latest data, they had 2 whole alphabets. One was every day, while the other we see on the walls of their temples was only used ceremonially. After the advent of Christianity and Islam, ancient Egyptian was totally banned, and very soon became a dead language because it was considered a symbol of paganism. Until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799, no one knew how to decipher the hieroglyphs. This stone, however, contains a decree from 196 BC, with the upper part in ancient Egyptian and the lower part with a translation in ancient Greek. So this translation turns out to be the key to deciphering the hieroglyphs, and that is why we can now understand their language. Pharaoh doesn't actually mean king or ruler, but God in human form. The Egyptians really believed that these were sons of God sent to rule them. The ancient Egyptians believed that men also had a cycle like women. However, the reason for this is rather strange. At the time, there was a widespread disease called schistosomiasis, which caused men to urinate blood. They even believed that men who had similar symptoms were more fertile. We now know that workers and not slaves drove the economy of the country, but recently it has come to light that they regularly went out on strikes and protests, demanding better working conditions. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, if not, give it a thumbs down. But if you want to give me a hand in what I do, share it with friends on social media. So really, with just one click, you are helping me super much, for which thank you. And don't forget to drop me a line below in the comments on which should be the next country. Thank you for being with me once again. Bye and see you soon.